Hi, I'm George, and this is a focused breakdown video for my sound redesign of Bethesda's Starfield. I'm going to break down 3 key elements of this sound redesign, but first I want to play you the redesign clip in full. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the Cockpit Ambience. The perspective switches back and forth between first and third person throughout the clip. Now obviously in real life you'd expect the cockpit to be the only area with air in it for sound to travel through, meaning there'd be no external sounds at all and complete silence when the camera switches to third person. If that was how I designed the clip though, there'd be hardly any content, so I took a little creative leeway and designed the project as if it was taking place in atmosphere. I wanted to reflect the player's perspective in the mix, so I sent almost every external sound into one bus so I could easily modulate volume and filters. Here's an example of that in practice. For the cockpit's ambience, I used a recording of a fridge humming, which I EQ'd to keep the mix clean and concise. To show you the effect of that, I'll play the sound and toggle on and off the EQ filter. The hum worked to represent the ship's console, but I felt it needed an extra element to really sell the ship's engine. I used a recording taken from the interior of a car to get the right effect, which I'll play together with the fridge hum and turn off and on for comparison. To complete the ambience, I added random metal creaks which are panned all around the player. The idea was to tell a story about the ship's history and give it character. When it came to the UI sounds, I created a set of criteria for each one to meet. That was, each sound had to be distinct from other UI sounds, each sound had to be clear and audible in the mix, and the texture alone of each sound should intuitively communicate its meaning to the player. For the orange thruster warning, I used a harsh, abrupt tone. For the player's ship locking on and off, I used a series of short, high-pitched beeps. For the player being locked onto by an enemy, I used a more traditional alarm sound with a lower pitch and longer tail than the other UI sounds. Here's a short example of the finished soundscape for the cockpit. Next up, I want to talk about the sounds for the engine, and I'm including the sounds for the thrusters in that as well. The engine has 3 main layers to it, which have been EQ'd so each one has its own space in the mix. There's also volume automation on the bus, and of each individual layer to emphasize changes to the ship's speed. There's a low frequency rumble, a recording taken from a space launch with added chorus to give it a sci-fi feel, and finally a layer of processed plastic wrapping to mimic air distortion, which is an idea I got from a Marshall McGee video which I'll leave a link to in the description. Here is all 3 layers combined. The thrusters are made up of many layers which I'll go through one by one. There's a very subby bass effect to sell the power and scale of the thrusters, a sonic boom to show the increase in speed, 2 distorted tonal layers to give the sound character, a noisy whoosh with automated tremolo to act as if the engine is having to work harder for the ship's rapid speed increase, a distorted rocket engine sound which sits quite low in the mix but helps to fill out gaps in the frequency spectrum, 2 fire layers to sell the heat being produced by the thrusters, and finally a subtle decompression sound for when the ship returns to normal speed. Here is the finished sound for the thrusters. The final thing I wanted to go over is the laser projectiles, which I'll break down layer by layer. I used a kick to give the sound a powerful low-end thump and synced it to play just before the rest of the layers, which is a tip I picked up while reading an interview with the sound team from the John Wick franchise, link in the description for that. The mechanical layer for this sound was taken from a grenade launcher. The recordings I used had a thunk to them, and that quality really helped to sell the weight of the cannons as they shoot the projectiles. I used the transient of a shotgun blast to give the sound an organic, real-world feel. For the lasers themselves, I used a synth to create a sustained sci-fi texture and fed that into a plugin called Beatbreaker using my own custom preset, which gave me this. After doing some processing to bed the sound into the space, here's what I ended up with. After getting some feedback, I decided the pew pew tone I created wasn't a great match for the more gritty and modern sci-fi visuals of Starfield. I kept an element of my first sound by passing a noisy recording into Beatbreaker, which gave me a similar tone but with a more organic feel, although I kept this layer quite subtle in the final mix. The main body of the sound comes from a car alarm sound I made for a previous project, which I trimmed and heavily processed. Each layer was EQ'd to give room in the frequency spectrum for others to come through. To finish this section of the video, I'm going to play you the final sound with no EQ, followed by a version with EQ applied. Thanks for watching this breakdown of my Starfield redesign. If you're interested in any more of my content, I have other linear sound redesign breakdowns on my channel and narrated technical implementation videos for my in-engine redesigns. Thanks for watching.